I really have enjoyed this opportunity during this series, this Way series, to really focus on those fundamental elements of the church as we reopen, as we reestablish ourselves. What are the things that are we finding that are important for us that God has led us to do and to be as a church? So to give you a little reminder, I don't know if our slides are ready. They might be ready soon. They're getting there. As a reminder, we've been going through a series called The Way. And it is a series, there we go. Yes, we've got it going on. It's called, and we are going through the Way. And the Way is all about these 7 disciplines, these 7 fundamental disciplines of being a church. Oh, there's Bob. Hi, Bob. These 7 fundamental disciplines of being a church. And so commonly, we often think of the church as one of, this is the title of the sermon, by the way, and we're going to move on here, as 3 things. This is a common attitude that I think many of us default to as we approach the church. We think of it as either information delivery, an emotional experience, or a place to belong. But the thing about this sermon is there's this underriding assumption that the church is way more about this. Indeed, it's more about the church. It's about the way of Jesus. How do we operate as Christians? More than just simply doing this thing we gather together on a Sunday morning. What are we doing as followers of Jesus in response to what he has asked us to do, living our lives not only here and beyond, and of course this goes beyond information delivery and emotional experience and gathering together in community. It is so much more. And so we've been talking about these 7 disciplines in terms of 3 arenas. The first arena we talked about was being subjects. And remember when we talked about subjects, we talked about these 7 disciplines as co-believers in Jesus, people with Jesus in our heart as we gather together. And I wanted to re-invoke an image that Melissa brought to us last week, the image of this bonfire. See, the underlying message of this series is that when believers come together, it is more than just simply the content of the meeting that is enriching for our souls. There is something about us as individuals, followers of Jesus, when we gather together in the presence of God and as we notice the presence of God and tend to the presence of God, stoking that fire of Jesus among us that both lives in us and among us, there is something warm about that. There is something inviting about that. That Jesus is, the wonderful thing about Jesus is not that you just get to come to church and listen to a great guy preach. Of course, that of course is amazing. But beyond that, what we get to experience both here and on our daily lives is this warmth of Jesus, which is his presence. And as we have noted through this series, that there are these 7 disciplines that by practicing these disciplines, we sort of fuel this fire together, that Jesus is sort of made more known and indeed enriches our space, and his presence is that much more stoked as we engage these disciplines. And so, of course, last series we talked about being together as co-disciples around this fire. What does that mean? And last time, we talked about this topic for today, which was on the slide before, being with children, which is our topic for today. I want to give you a brief recap because I don't want to kind of mix over things. We first looked at Matthew chapter 18, verses 3 to 5, and reading this. It says, this is Jesus speaking, "Truly I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever takes the lowly position of this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me." You welcome a child, you welcome Jesus. The key to further enriching and stoking this fire, this bonfire of God, is to welcome children in our midst. But not just simply welcome them as a token. No, indeed, of the very next couple verses, Matthew 18, 6 to 7 says, "If anyone causes one of these little ones, those who believe in me, to stumble, it would be better for them to have a large millstone hung around their neck to be drowned in the depths of the sea. Woe to the world because of the things that cause people to stumble. Such things must come, but woe to the person through whom they come." And of course, we move ahead to Matthew chapter 19, verse 13 to 15. Again, this is still all review from last time, although it bears on today's sermon. Matthew chapter 19, verses 13 to 15, then people brought the little children to Jesus for him to place his hands on them and pray. But the disciples rebuked the children. But Jesus said, let the children come to me and do not hinder them. For the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these. When he placed his hands on them, he went on from there. You see, everything we talked about last time was that children are more than just to be here as a token or just to be kind of seen and not heard. Indeed, they are here to be brought together with us because it is through them that we experience the blessings of God. And we talked about a variety of different things. You can remember this from last time. I will not go over all these. You can listen to the sermon online. That we talked about how when they are simply tolerated, when they are separated, when they are unintegrated, when they're assimilated without being adopted, when they are aggravated, underestimated, and unknown, that these are all ways that we cause our children to stumble. Indeed, one of the main points, I didn't say this last time, but sort of a summary of the last bit, is that the more children are with us, the more they will teach us about the kingdom of God, and vice versa. That they will teach us and we will teach them. It's a mutual thing. That is what it is to be with children as hosts, as subjects, fully welcoming the children into our presence because it is in them that the presence of God is found. This is one of the reasons, by the way, that we do have the children in the service for such a while. There are many churches out there who kind of dismiss the children at the very beginning, and I'm not here to look down on other churches' decisions, but we have done this intentionally. We keep them in here so that they can be with us. It is a discipline of being with them and having them be with them so that we can further see what God is doing in our midst. But now we are moving on to hosts. So we've talked about being subjects and having them together. So what does it mean in this hosts arena? And as a quick reminder, to be a host is a little bit different than being a subject, because before you can see that it was just believers around this bonfire, but as Melissa really illustrated very well, it's about bringing other people to that fire. You see, we often think of letting people know about Jesus because, of course, that's one thing that we truly want to do, right? We know this wonderful, amazing, powerful, magnificent reality that is Jesus. And if it is indeed so wonderful and so warm and so inviting, man, isn't it great that we could invite people along? Like, if you knew of a better taco place than the taco place that I'm aware of, the best taco place, by the way, is the food truck down in Simcoe, by the way. Amazing tacos, authentic tacos. You must go, especially if you're new to Brantford. It's 45 minutes, but it's 45 minutes worth the trip. See, there you go. I just invited you to the bonfire that is this great taco place. It's so amazing. Why would you hold back something amazing to the people around you, to the world? And in the same way, we want to invite the world, we want to invite our communities, we want to invite our neighbors to this bonfire with us. But of course, there's a risk. Because the risk of bringing other people to this bonfire, to Jesus, to bring us to be with us, is that they look a little different than us. See, one of them is kind of green and one's purple. Green and purple people, who needs them, right? But no, indeed, God welcomes all people to hear. And we enjoy and the way that they know about Jesus is not simply by hearing content, by having the emotional experience, by experiencing community. It is the presence of God as tended to among us that they get to experience the wonderfulness of God as well. It's a much different than the way we normally think of evangelism, right? We think of evangelism, and in a way this is still that, but when we often think of it, we think of it as, I've got to tell this person about the message. I got to sit them down. I got to give them the 4 spiritual laws. I got to sit them down. I got to read John 3:16, and then they know, and that's evangelism. And not that that is not something to do, but this is something so much more rich, because the way that we are sharing Jesus is by practicing the wonderfulness of Jesus together. And so these guests, as we host the presence of Jesus, they get to experience all the wonderfulness that is Jesus and kind of see it, taste and see, as Melissa said last week, the goodness that is God. And of course, we can host these disciplines, and these are indeed, and we are, of course, talking about being with children. So I'm going to get there in a second. So, the thing about being with children, though, is this is one of the more, I think, difficult practices to practice as hosts. Because, as I said, when you bring hosts, you're bringing all the world. And indeed, we kind of touched on this last week with Melissa in bringing the least of these to be around us. Melissa touched on the uncomfortable nature of what it might mean to bring the least of these. You see, when church is about information, transmission, emotional experience, and community, people who are different or kind of distract us away from the experience, they're kind of a barrier. And if any of you have been parents or grandparents or have been around any children indeed, children definitely get in the way of every single one of these things. Information delivery, bah! Emotional experience, noise in the background. Community, I got to take them to the bathroom, got to deal with them. The perception that we can default to in our most carnal of selves is that they are a bother. And so when we come together as hosts, and we want to host the presence of Jesus together, the temptation is often to do this. And see, we have justified this saying they think this is a good thing for us. They say, oh, well, we want to host the presence of Jesus for them, so let's send them over there. Let's put them in a different place so that we're not being distracted away from all this information delivery, from all this emotional experience I want to have. It's all about us. It's all about my experience of the thing, so I just want to kind of send them away. And yeah, maybe we'll throw a couple leaders in there, the suckers. The people who have signed up and said, yes, we need more volunteers. All right, we'll send them along. We'll put them there, and then we can have our little bonfire. And they can have a little bonfire too, a small one. It's good for them. It's good for us. We both get bonfires. See, it's fine. It's wonderful. What's wrong with this picture? If we truly believe that the presence of Jesus is what draws people, if we truly believe in the warmth of the bonfire, then adding more people to that will further enrich the bonfire. We follow Jesus. We trust Jesus by hearing his word and saying that when you welcome a child, you welcome me. And so what we have basically done is we have cast out some of the image bearers of God for the sake of my own preference, but we have stopped actually trusting in God. We have stopped becoming a subject of our Father. We have become a subject of my own preference. And so what we end up doing is creating this sort of separate space outside of the main space, and the body of Christ is disjointed. And I am not saying, and I said this last time, and you can listen back to it, I'm not saying there's no place for age separation. Indeed, we send our children downstairs to have their time. That's fine. We have youth groups. When we will develop youth groups soon, we'll have a time for the youth that come together. This is all fine. But here is one of the issues. Oftentimes, when we create these separate spaces, it becomes its own thing, as if this is the thing and the way and it's proper to be. When we don't tend to the discipline of being with children and being with youth, we tend to think, this is fine, this is great. They have their space and I have mine. And some very observant youth ministers who care about youth and who have been trying to bring them into the church started noticing problems with this several years ago. Youth ministry only became a thing sort of the beginning of this or last century, of the 19th century, because the whole stage of adolescence wasn't even a thing for all of history. You grew up as a child and then you became an adult, and society wasn't as complicated as it is today. But as society became more complicated, as things like tax returns and financial management and getting a job and all the rigmarole of everyday life became part of life, increasingly, researchers who are interested in child development and stuff started noticing around the 1920s that this thing called adolescence was emerging. Something about the culture was making it a lot slower for kids to grow up. This sermon is not going to go into all of those things. There's a lot of people more smarter than I that have observed it. But we see that, we definitely see the result of it today. It takes a long time for kids to grow up, and there's something about our culture, and it's not just recently, it's been for the last 100 years, that has caused them to grow up. And so kids, adolescents, were seemingly having a hard time integrating into adult church. And so what did the adults say? Well, for the love of Jesus, or wanting them to experience Jesus, we want to host the presence of Jesus among them and create this thing called youth ministry. And this was all great because it was all about getting them back into the big bonfire that is the Church of God. But in about the 1980s, this youth ministry guy wrote an article called The One-Eared Mickey Mouse. It's a Mickey Mouse, and it's got one ear. He couldn't have just called it the two-circle model. He called it the one-eared Mickey Mouse. And what he observed in this is, as a youth ministry, and this was in the 80s, so we're even 40 years from them. Can you believe it's been 40 years since the 80s? You're all looking at me going, oh, you can talk. Ignore that. He noticed in the 80s that what had developed was that we often say that our youth ministries, our children's ministries are part of the church. And we'll often say we want young people to come to church, so we'll create a young people's group. And this church, indeed, has had many history. We have gone through this discernment process and heard God say and affirm the many efforts for young people that we've had over the years. But what he noticed is that over time, youth ministry didn't become sort of a central part of the core life of the church. It became this sort of entity that was kind of stuck at the side, and there wasn't really a lot of it would share maybe the building and maybe some leaders, but was there community among the youth and the adults? Not necessarily. Was there any kind of shared experiences? Well, they were increasingly getting minimal. And one of the more shocking things is what was happening to the youth once they graduated out of this. Were they indeed transitioning to the big bonfire that is the Church of God? And increasingly, they were witnessing no. And we've done this for years, but it doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand why. Can you imagine if, and I said this last time, can you imagine if all of us were told in 5 years, you will all be kicked out of this church and you have to go to the church down the street? Like you're supplanted from your community, and if there's no intentional effort to integrate, then they just graduate from youth ministry and graduate from the church. And this is someone in the 1980s using not hosting language, but using the very same concept that we are discovering by looking at the Bible, that it is not just simply about doing programming together or having an array of programming that satisfies every age. Is about tending to the presence of Jesus together. And the extent to which we can be with children in this bonfire is not only the extent to which we will be blessed, but they will be blessed. It's mutual. That's what the body of Christ is all about. So again, this picture, the picture that we often paint, and again, there's nothing wrong with some youth ministry, children's ministry, separate age, Q Kids programming. There's nothing wrong with that in itself. But along the way, what we want to do is find ways in which we as a church and us individually can host the presence of Jesus together, to have them see and taste what indeed is so great about this bonfire that we're all experiencing together. And so in looking for a way to explore what does this mean, how indeed do we host the people who are other than us, I came right to the passage that Wendy read for us. So I invite you to turn to John chapter 4. We've already read the passage, so I'm going to kind of step through this, because what we might have missed is what Jesus is actually doing is giving us a hosting lesson. So first things first, verse 3. So he left Judea and went back once more to Galilee. Jesus was on his way home, and this whole story transpires. What do we do when we get home, or we are on our way home? We get in the car, we drive there as quick as possible, do not pass go, do not collect $200, we just try to get there as quick as possible. And admittedly, some of us, and we've gotten out of the habit of doing this during the pandemic, and it's been to our detriment. And of course, we are coming back into things, but so very often it seems the attitude is come to church and go home right away as quickly as we can. We think what we're here for is just the song and dance that we're doing here in the middle of the thing, but what is just as valid as the preaching and the worship is the community time that we have together. Not just simply on a Sunday morning, but also during the week afterwards. And one of the things that Jesus is teaching us is that even on the way he was going home, he was slowing down. He wasn't simply trying to get from A to B and going home as quickly as possible. He had a pace that allowed for him to be interrupted on his way back. So that's the very first thing. And this actually goes for the least of these or hosting anyone, but it especially includes being with children. Because when it comes to being with children, they will not operate at the pace that we are necessarily operating at. And so we sometimes need to slow down or expect things to not happen as quickly in order to even allow them to come along and host them. Verse 4, now he had to go through Samaria. Ooh. Many of us know already the deal with Samaria. Samaria, it was sort of the untouchable place from the Jewish perspective. These were the people that we really don't want to spend a long time there, but Jesus nonetheless went through to Samaria. And so what do we learn about this, about hosting this woman at the well? In order to get to the woman at the well, he had to not avoid the uncomfortable places. He sat there. He went through Samaria. He went through the place where he thought that, things are not necessarily going to go super smoothly. We're going to meet some people who are not necessarily the right people to go with, but he nonetheless went there. And this is a good key thing for especially hosting. This goes for the least of these as well, but also for children. They will not necessarily be in the spaces that we are occupying. Oftentimes, we need to go into spaces they are at in order to find where they're at. Now, of course, we want to do this safely, and even as I said just that, we have to recognize that as a 30-some-year-old guy to just simply go into a playground with a bunch of kids without any sort of context and just start playing with the kids, that's going to be perceived a little bit oddly. So when I'm saying occupy their spaces, I'm saying do so gently and wisely. We're not just simply going to barge into a child's life because of those safety measures. In the same way that Jesus wouldn't have walked into Samaria going, down with Samaria on his, like a t-shirt going, woo, Jerusalem, yay! You have to apply wisdom to the way you enter into these spaces. But Jesus recognized, just as we recognize, in order to host the people of Samaria, he had to go to Samaria. In order to host children, you need to go to places where they're at. So there's a lot of different ways we can do this. First of all, you can build relationships with the families. You are connected with the families, talk with them, get to know them, and find a way to kind of jerry-rig yourself into an invite to their house for dinner or invite them to your house for dinner. Feed them a meal. Gosh, parents these days, they could use a meal. And you're going to invite them and do all the cleaning and everything, invite everyone together. Who is bringing all the Kenny family tonight? 6 children, go! No. But that's a great, very practical way to start in the context of our community. And there's just so many different other ways, but just getting to know them and allowing yourself to know the people in your community by just simply sitting down and being at the table. Remember table, one of the first discipline? There you go, it all cross-pollinates. Now, for some of you, and some of you online, you may be saying, but I don't really like kids. And you're running for cover because you feel like what I'm telling you right now is you have to like kids to be part of the church. No. Listen. I get it. There are several of us who are not blessed with the gift of engaging children. And there's some of us who just, when in their heart of hearts, they don't want to engage. They don't really want to actively engage with kids. But here's the thing. We're not called to actively engage literally every single person. We're not called, even though as we're hosting the least of these and other people in a community, we're not necessarily called to be the closest of friends with literally everybody. But we do need to offer a space of welcome. Sometimes it's more about the things that you're not doing than the things you're doing. Not engaging them in a spirit of standoffishness. Just at least a welcome, a smile, a hello. Providing a space. You don't have to go anything further than that if you're just the kind of person that says, I really don't want him to tell me to volunteer in the nursery. Don't tell me to volunteer in the nursery. You don't have to. All you have to do is do what you can to create to cultivate a safe space, a non-judgmental space, and sometimes that's just simply smiling, saying hello. Now, verse 5. So he came down to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, verse 6 was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about noon. This point is very similar to the previous point. It's about not just simply not avoiding uncomfortable spaces, but engaging. And again, this is not necessarily for everyone, but this is a lesson for us in hosting. Jesus could have sat anywhere else if he wanted to avoid the Samaritans, yet he sat at the well. Everyone's got a drink. It doesn't say this in the Bible, but I had to know that I have to think that he had to know that there might be a possibility that someone was sitting there. But it happened the way I'm sure he wanted it. He sat there seeing and waiting for an opportunity to host. How are you? Not actively trying to pounce on, again, remember safety and non-creepiness, like not pouncing on the children as soon as they come, but how are you opening yourself and sitting in the space, kind of waiting and noticing God in an opportunity to host a child? Even in a smile, it doesn't have to be, above and beyond it, but there are different ways, and I love all the little stories that I've heard over the years of the variety of ways that our church people in our community, our seniors and other adults, how they have their own little ways to engage the ways that are very appropriate and provide that opportunity for connection. Bud, after all, is the candy man. Man, who doesn't love candy? My kids love going up to Bud and getting that little piece of candy. It's his little way to just kind of show love and care and host a child. I'm not saying we all have to get candy. Please don't everyone give my children candy. But find it something else, paper airplanes or something, whatever it is. But it's his little way of hosting children here. And what is yours? How will you wait by the well at the side of the bonfire, applying all sorts of metaphors here, so that you can host a child? Verse 8, let's skip down ahead to verse 8, or verse 7 and 8, I should say. We'll go straight to verse 8. This is the parenthetical statement that says, his disciples had gone into town to buy food. Gotta love Jesus, right? First, it's Mary and Martha, where Martha's doing all the work, and Jesus just sitting there, just kind of lounging about and saying, and for all of us Marthas who want to get the work done, to be like, oh, come on, Jesus, can you get this person to help? And it's like, oh, gosh, It is so easy for some of us to think that the objective here is to just get things done. But indeed, what Jesus shows himself doing here is prioritizing. Yes, logistics are important. Yes, for all of you and me Marthas who are getting everything ready, that is a valid thing. But just as Jesus said to Mary, she has chosen the better thing. So in the same way, Jesus has said, you know what? There are groceries to be purchased, but I'm going to sit by a well just to see if maybe I can host someone from Samaria. It doesn't say that was like a bad thing he scolded them for doing, just like Mary wasn't scolded in Luke chapter 10. But nonetheless, Jesus found it. He stuck back and he recognized the moment and prioritized this opportunity to host. Going on into verse 9, 11, and 12, you can see that the Samaritan woman responds by saying things like, you are a Jew and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink? And he says, sir, you have nothing to draw with. The well is deep. Where are you getting this living water? Like, she's all confused by his responses. And you can imagine that when we start hosting, we must expect surprise and confusion, especially from our children. We have to understand that children today, and this has nothing to do with any one of us individually, it's not to do with parents or whatever, it's just society. Society has sort of embedded in children today a sort of nervousness about adults. And this goes right up probably until they're even in their young adult area. Like, it is very difficult for a young person to engage with an adult. This is borne out by so many different reasons, from previous experiences, from just lack of confidence, by the fact that they're just so much bigger or wiser or older, they don't know what to do, they don't know how they will react. So when you begin to start hosting the children around you, don't expect right away that they're going to engage you in a sort of an adult conversation, adult way. Expect kind of surprise, confusion, not knowing what to do with it. That's okay. When your first smile and hello is just kind of met from Simon with like, don't be discouraged. Because especially using Simon as an example, like the more that you just simply demonstrate that you're just a safe person, you're just kind of this person that just kind of waves, he's going to kind of like a monkey, just kind of like slowly find his way closer to you. Like even Dave like kind of scared the living daylights out of Simon the very first time he met him. And now Simon's like, hey, it's Dave, it's fine, it's cool. Expect surprise, confusion, all sorts of things, but don't let that discourage you. But also don't just simply blow over that and be like, oh, well, no matter what, I'm just going to be sort of all like this, like the golden retriever that I'm usually am, just like kind of continually trying to get their attention. Play it cool. Play it cool, especially for teenagers. Play it cool. Play it real cool. I've had to learn that, listen, you guys know me. I'm the golden retriever pastor. I know this. Very excitable. Really like being with people. I've got to learn to play it cool because they'll come. Surprise and confusion will be expected, just like with the woman at the well. And so for much of this passage, and we'll not read the whole thing, you can read it again on your own. Basically what Jesus does is he sits there and he shares his presence. He shares the good news. He shares who he is. We will hopefully get that benefit, that blessing of being able to host a child and be able to share who Jesus is with them. But it doesn't mean you have to say words to them. You don't have to like preach the gospel to them or say a particular verse. Because again, this whole series is predicated, again, on the very presence of Jesus being within us as we use our gifts, as we operate as a community. And so what we can trust is that when we do this, this will have an enormous benefit on the children and the youth that we are hosting. We don't have to simply... We don't have to do it ourselves. We just simply need to be Jesus for them in the same way that Jesus was just himself with the Samaritan woman. Verse 16 to 18. I think I'm following right here. Yeah, 16 to 18. He told her, go call your husband and come back. Remember this little part of the story? I have no husband, she replied. Jesus said to her, you are right when you have said you have no husband. The fact is you have had 5 husbands. The man you now have is not your husband. What you have just said is quite true. And she says, sir, I can see you are a prophet. Our ancestors worship in the mountain, but you Jews claim that the place where you must worship is Jerusalem. Now, I would love to have been a fly on the wall in this conversation to see kind of like exactly like the tone and the ways in which each of the approaches, because on the surface, this seems like a pretty barrier sort of establishing thing. You know, oh yeah, I'm a rabbi, and I know that you're an adulteress. Talk about the worst thing to say as a pastor, or as anyone in the congregation. We need to, when we are hosting people for Jesus, be it with the children, the least of these, or anyone, we just need to be aware of those relational traps. Jesus was obviously had a special Jesus wisdom in bringing forth this truth in a way that she still felt invited. She received this as, wow, I can't believe you know that. You must be a wise person. You must be a prophet. He used that not as a relational barrier, but as a way to kind of invite her in. So this is not an invitation for us as hosts to say, well, Jesus pointed out her sin, so I'm going to point out the sin of everyone, and that's going to bring them closer to Jesus. No. That is not what's going to. Please beware of those relational traps, because what we want to do, again, is host the presence of Jesus, which means drawing them closer to the bonfire rather than getting them to run as quickly as possible away from the bonfire. So skipping ahead to verse 27. Just as then his disciples returned and were surprised to find him talking with a woman. But no one asked, what do you want? Or why are you talking with her? It was a good thing, too, because I imagine what Jesus would have smacked them upside the head. But just the point here is they were all thinking it. They were all thinking, Jesus, what are you doing talking to a woman and a Samaritan woman? When we host people, when we use this space to host children, to do things a little differently, to accept that things won't necessarily go by our preference, when we have in the first few minutes of the service the children with us, and my son, the pastor's son, is running in and out of the service when I told him specifically to walk, but he just runs. He is so comfortable and he loves this place. We have all hosted him to an extent that he feels comfortable and safe, and this is a place where he loves to come. Hallelujah. And when we do this, yes, there's going to be a little noise. Yes, there's going to be a little distraction. Yes, there's going to be a little Simon murmuring, asking all sorts of questions during the prayer. We're praying now. Shush. We're praying now. Shush. But it's going to be a little bit different, and there's going to be those people that maybe are thinking what they're thinking, just like the disciples, or might actually say it like, what about all these children that are here? It's super distracting. I think we should send them out. There will be naysayers. Heck, I'm a naysayer in my own brain sometimes. Why are my children here? It'd be so much easier. I'd have so much more time. But we have to remember that as those naysaying tendencies pop into our own brains, we have to all, myself, remind me, please, on those hard days. Remind me that the reason why we're doing this is to host the presence of Jesus together. And then finally, Jesus ends with this in verse 34 to 38. The disciples disciples are trying to offer him food, and then Jesus says, my food is to do the will of him who sent me and to finish his work. Don't you have a saying, it is still 4 months until harvest? I tell you, open your eyes and look at the fields. Even now, the one who reaps draws a wage and harvests a crop for eternal life. And it goes on. Look at what we are doing, Queensway, by welcoming children and by the efforts that I know that we will continue to do as you in your individual life. And unless you think I'm talking about just this worship service, our hosting responsibilities go beyond, because the presence of Jesus follows us into the world. In your homes, in your relationships, in your families. You have kids who perhaps are desperate to know the love and the safety and the warmth of that bonfire we know is at Jesus. So don't let your hosting stop here. Indeed, as you go into the world, as you deal with your family and your children and your grandchildren and your coworkers and that really annoying kid next door, Dennis the Menace, he's just, praise Mr. Wilson for having the patience for that kid, because if we all took that and allowed them to see how awesome this Jesus person is by simply how we host his presence as God leads us to do so, what an amazing harvest we will reap. What an amazing harvest we will reap when we show the families that will be coming, because God will be sending families into our midst to hear and come and experience the love of Jesus. What a harvest we will reap for the kingdom, for that benefit. Not because it's going to make our service any more according to my preferences or your preferences or whoever's preferences, because we'll know that we have created a safe space for children to know, to be hosted, and to experience the warmth of Jesus that we know.